I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. I'm the CEO and founder of Lisa Colledge Consulting, and I help organizations to design a culture which is inclusive of all of the different thinking styles that people have. And that culture then becomes the most innovative, engaged and resilient culture possible. And I do that based on the principles of neurodivergence inclusion. In this episode of Culture by Neurodesign, I'm going to talk about DEI in the media spotlight. Are you feeling the pressure? And what I want to do is to focus on the current discussions about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI programs becoming less popular. I want to talk about that from the perspective of the discomfort that you, as a leader, may very well feel in talking about the issues of DEI. Now, I know from my own experience that this can be really scary. And I know from leading inclusion initiatives that fear of offending someone or a group of people is one of the biggest reasons that people don't take the very first step towards more inclusive behavior. Not everything that I am saying about DEI is the accepted popular opinion. And believe me, I was nervous when I first said something like, don't invest anymore in diversity initiatives that only drive for representation. Instead, focus on inclusion initiatives that actually enable people to succeed in the roles that you put them in. Equally, not everything that I say about neurodivergence is the accepted popular opinion either. For example, saying that the black and white distinction between autistic and non-autistic, between ADHD and non-ADHD is artificial. It's just an artifact of our society's need to diagnose or not diagnose. That is not an opinion that I see expressed very often. And I was really worried in the beginning that a strong backlash could destroy my business. Now, my business is probably a smaller business than yours, but believe me, the impact to me, if it would be destroyed, is at least as great as the impact to you. So it's a real concern. I understand that. But I also know that when you try and when you're open and you ask for help to understand and to learn, that people are almost without exception patient and generous and will always help. You won't be able to please everybody, not 100%, but I don't think that that is my job or your job when you're talking about this area. Our job is really to create an informed position, an evidence-based position, which we communicate and which we remain open to iterate as we learn more and as we experience more. We also have to act true to that position, right? I think that's also an important part of our jobs, so that people can trust us because they know what they are getting into when they start to work with us, and they can have faith that what they think they are getting is actually also what's going to happen. So what I want to do now is to talk through a couple of examples where people got into problems. And then I'll look at what we can do to feel more confident about representing ourselves and our businesses in the context of inclusion in public, right? And try to overcome that fear that you may well feel if you're listening to this episode. So my first example is drawn from a response to the Black Lives Matter movement. It's obviously a sensitive movement. It's very personal to many people. A lot of the situations that have happened in the last few years are very inflammatory and drive strong reactions from people. And this can be a situation where it's very intimidating to speak out, especially speak out representing a company. And what I want to do is share an example of a CEO who did that and got it wrong, not once, but twice. So I've recently been reading about the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff. And back in 2016, when black men were fatally shot by white policemen, and there was a big outcry with the Black Lives Matter movement, Mark posted Mark tweeted a very tone-deaf tweet, and he got absolutely slammed for it. The reason was that he was seen as being very hypocritical in involving himself in this movement, when actually the representation of Black people in his organization was way under what it should have been. When you look at the regions of the world in which Salesforce operates, there should have been a much higher proportion of Black people if he was operating in an inclusive way. So there was a real disconnect between his public persona and what was actually the situation in Salesforce, and that seems to have been the reason for this big backlash. So he used this backlash as an opportunity to improve, and he asked people, and he found out about Salesforce's shortcomings, and he started to push for improvements, structural improvements. So these include things like creating a chief equality officer role and dedicating resources to community initiatives to help to drive representation in the communities that Salesforce operates in, and focusing on improving their hiring practices to make sure that the workforce will become more diverse. So these are real changes that he made, and he made progress with Salesforce towards a more diverse workforce. In 2020, after George Floyd was shot, he was criticised again, despite all of those improvements that he'd made based on what he'd learned in 2016. He was criticised again because he didn't comment, or he was perceived not to comment quickly enough. And the reason was that not commenting was not perceived as being in line with the values that Salesforce had put in place in driving the inclusion of Black people much more in the Salesforce organization. So people wanted to hear from him, but he was silent. He also learned from that, and now he uses his position to advocate for social change. But you can see how sensitive it is, how people will make their opinions known, but also how important it is to learn from the mistakes that you make. Also notice that it was not the end. Salesforce was not destroyed by these mistakes. Salesforce has gone on to become more successful. Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a while, but now I want to share a second example with you, and this is from the area of DEI, which I am an expert in. I'm not an expert in the Black Lives Matter area, but I follow it closely. This is from the area of neurodivergence inclusion. Right, so neurodivergence is also a really sensitive area for people who are impacted by it, either directly themselves or indirectly because they're caring for a neurodivergent family member, for example. So you can also see very emotional backlash responses from usually individuals who feel personally slighted sometimes when you may make a mistake or say something that they don't like. So I want to share a real example from a recent LinkedIn discussion. This won't be in the news, not like the events with Mark and Salesforce, but let me know if you want the link to the discussion. Okay, I'm happy to share it with you. And the discussion was a response to a post by a gentleman called Chris Bonello. And this post said, when people say something like, we're all a bit autistic, you actually belittle the real struggles that autistic people face every single day, and you negate the need for the support that they need to be able to contribute to our society. And he called it neuro-appropriation. I responded to this post because I don't agree with that position anymore. I used to. Right, soon after my son was diagnosed, I used to agree with that position. I would think, when people say, oh, we're all a bit autistic, you don't understand how difficult it is for us to help our young son to engage at school or at daycare or with his family, right? My son also has learning difficulties, not only autism, which maybe makes it extra challenging, but still, I really responded very emotionally and personally and felt like people didn't understand. But actually, since I've learned more and stayed open to different opinions, I think I was wrong, and that was what I posted. Now I see from the research that everybody actually is a bit autistic. When we say it's a spectrum, it genuinely is a spectrum. There's a continuum of 0 autistic traits to 100% autistic traits, and every single person is somewhere on that spectrum. There's also a spectrum for ADHD and all the other neurodivergences, but everybody is somewhere on the spectrum. There is a particular point where we say, okay, beyond this point, you're autistic, and we diagnose it. But I realized that yeah, I was wrong. And I've started to see that because people can identify with some of the characteristics of autism, it's a great way to let people feel connected to the neurodivergence inclusion movement, and to start to think about what they can do to change their behavior, to really make a difference for people who are autistic in their organization. So actually I see it now as a bonus. I didn't always see it like that, but okay, I know, because I know how I reacted, that this is one of those posts where you have to be really, really careful responding to it. And I was careful, right? I posted, but I was careful with my wording. I read my message out loud, because sometimes you hear different things when you read it out loud than you do when you're reading silently. And I didn't post it straight away. I came back to it later to make sure that it still said what I wanted it to say, and I posted it. All fine, all fine. I'm sure not everybody agrees with me, but I didn't get any negative backlash. That's unlike a lady, Meshna Koran. I'm using names because this is all out in the public domain. She commented that the term neuro-appropriation is causing unnecessary polarization, real us versus them, real us versus them feeling, and that's not what we want to do in inclusion initiatives. Now, I know Meshna, and I fully agree with her point of view, and I was really surprised, right, to see quite aggressive response from a lady called Paula Kramer, who said, Meshna, you're forcing me to see the post from your perspective. You're ignoring my experiences. I don't see it the way that you see it. You're stereotyping me. You're telling me what to think. I'm not happy. So it's not surprising to me, because I know Meshna, but I still think it's admirable that she stayed in the discussion. And she was trying to explain her point of view, and she was trying to learn. She didn't say, oh, I was wrong, I'm getting out of the discussion. She stayed in there. She stayed true to her opinion, which was informed and was evidence-based. And they concluded the discussion where I think basically they just agreed that both of them had a point, and it was okay. Paula had to have the last word, but it was all right. Now, I don't agree with what Paula was saying. I don't really understand her concern, even though I've tried. And I wasn't the only one. There were comments from another lady called Abby Mazzaro about how she found Paula's comments unnecessarily aggressive, and that what she was saying was actually an example of exactly what she was criticizing Meshna for. Okay, it's very involved. As I say, let me know if you want the link, but you can see this area is very sensitive. And if you're not sure what you're doing, this can be a reason why you say, I'm just not going to engage. I think it might be better to just say nothing. I'm a bit nervous. I'm a bit scared. I don't want to do that. But don't do that. You're a leader, right? You can manage this. You have had to share decisions and opinions before that were risky, that might not have been popular. You've made mistakes before. You've had negative feedback before. Treat this the same. It's not different from the perspective of a leader just because it's got this DEI label on it. Realize that the responses are not personal. And I suggest that you see it in a similar way to how you see it when people may react poorly to your products or to your services. In that case, what do you think? You think, okay, maybe we didn't understand the problem properly, or maybe we haven't articulated our position properly, or we haven't articulated the benefits of our offering properly. You ask people, right? And then you learn, and then you iterate. Maybe you create a new strategy, but you practice. This situation is exactly the same. Specifically in inclusion, I want to say you can't back away because you're nervous of a backlash, because as a leader, you have a responsibility to find the best people for the roles that you have available. And it can't be possible that when you put the best people, genuinely the best people for your roles into your organization, that is not representative of the communities that you operate in. Right, so you really have a responsibility to find the best people. Automatically, that will then become inclusive if you're enabling everybody to perform. That's a topic for other episodes. You also have a duty to optimize the value of your organization. Right, if you're leaving opportunity on the table, you are not doing your job. You need to extract all of the value that you can from what you're offering. And you can only do that when you properly integrate diversity into your organization and enable it. So you can't back away from this topic because you're nervous of immediate backlash. No. Now let's move on to the advice part of this podcast. Now, I think that the key to being successful in this area, and I notice that I'm saying successful and not just to surviving in this area, because it can make a real measurable difference to your organization's success and to the engagement of your people. The key is being authentic. Right? I am authentic when I share my opinions. They're evidence-based, they're informed, I am authentic. Sometimes I say, I don't agree with the opinion I had earlier anymore, and these are the reasons why I've changed my opinion. But I am authentic when I do that. And although I'm sure not 100% of people agree with me, I am experiencing support from the community that I participate in. Meshna, on the LinkedIn posts about neuro-appropriation, she was authentic in her opinion, and she stayed in that engagement in a way that is authentic to her personality. And she was supported by me and by others, and she's happy because she enjoyed the mental challenge and she learnt something from that engagement. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, he was not being authentic in those two situations that he was criticized for. The first situation resulting from the shootings back in 2016 was that he was perceived to be joining a movement when his organization was not representative of the people who were involved in that movement. His own house was not in order, so what right did he have to comment on this movement? That was the reason for the first criticism. And the second, he was not commenting when he had taken steps to improve things in Salesforce and to support Black people in his local communities beyond Salesforce. So again, he was not being authentic, right? He was not, people were not connecting with him in a way that they had grown to expect that he would behave. So I'm going to share a third example now of a company which knows its position, and it was confident to stand behind its position while also learning from what is happening in the world. Now, this is an example that was communicated personally to me. It's not, as far as I'm aware, out there in the public domain, so I'm not going to name names or name companies here, but it is a real example of an organization which was placed under pressure by its employees to make a public statement after the shooting of George Floyd. It's obviously highly emotional, very sensitive, inflammatory situation, high profile. It would probably have been easiest for the leadership of that company to just put out a statement. But intentionally, they decided not to do that because it felt empty to them, right? It wasn't actually in line with what they had done to integrate the Black community into their company, and they felt it would be hypocritical. They felt that although their employees were calling for a statement, they would soon realize that it was not authentic, it was not in line with what the leadership had done, and the employees would become disengaged. And in the end, there would be no change. So what was the point? So this leadership took, I think, a very brave decision not to put out a public statement, because they felt it was very out of alignment with how they'd approached DEI to date. What they wanted was to be authentic, but to use this realization that they felt they couldn't put out this statement, they wanted to use that realization to drive improvements in the organization. So that's what they did. The board, invited employees to come and talk to them, like, directly, about any discrimination that they had faced and what it felt like. They invited people to come and be emotional. Apparently it was very raw, and people did share what they had experienced in the organization. They said what they wanted to say. They trusted the board to listen, and the board did listen. And they were so moved by what they heard that they asked the people who were volunteering to share their experiences with them whether they could record those experiences and make them available throughout the whole company. And they did that with the permission of the participants. So having heard that, then they started to run an inclusion program that has been so successful that they're going to roll it out all across the parent company. Isn't that fantastic? So even if you feel nervous, even if you feel scared about engaging in these kind of discussions, try to make yourself keep going. Force yourself to keep going. And the key is, remember, to be authentic. Educate yourself, practice, ask for help, ask people to listen to you and feedback to you, ask people if they're experiencing anything negative from what you're saying unintentionally, try and uncover your unconscious biases, but make sure you're authentic and make sure that you keep supporting and talking about the importance of DEI. See you next time.